Hi, welcome back to Random Reading Pathways. I'm Matt, and I am sick. I'm a little bit sick at the moment. It is the fall season, and with the kids in school right now, it's sort of just like the inevitability of the first cold and when it's going to come. So that time is right now. So hopefully my voice cooperates with me through the course of this video, and I should be able to get through it. But I'm here today on Tag Tuesday with a tag. This is the end of year reading tag. I was tagged to do this by Shannon over at Shannon's Shelf. So thanks to him for giving me a chance to look ahead to the next couple months and see what that looks like for my reading and start to look beyond into 2025. So there are 6 prompts to go through with this tag, and hopefully I'll get through them relatively quickly and coherently with a clear throat if I can manage that. So question 1 for the tag is, any book started this year that you need to finish? So for this one, I decided to actually just go with a series that I started this year. I'm 2/3 of the way through it, and I am hopeful that I will finish it by year's end, and that is the Lacanius fantasy trilogy by James Islington. So you have book 1 is The Shadow of What Was Lost. Book 2 is An Echo of Things to Come. So I've read those this year. I talked about An Echo of Things to Come in a recent video a little bit, and I'm enjoying this series so far. And I have book 3 on the docket still. Last I checked at my local library, it was sitting right there in the same place I've seen it many visits before. No one seems to be taking it, so hopefully it will remain in that spot for me when I'm ready for it. So the third book is The Light of All That Falls, and that's the conclusion of the Lacanius trilogy. So yeah, it's a lot to get into with that series. Right now in this format, it's probably too much to get into, but yeah, it's an interesting trilogy. It is basically in a fictional world where you have all different ranks of humans that have all different types of powers and abilities. And some of them get too powerful. So, prior to the series starting, there was a rebellion against these class of people called augurs, because they had gotten too powerful. And so the series starts 20 years post this overthrowing of the augurs to see kind of where everybody shakes out at this point with their different levels of superpowers, basically. But yeah, I did finish book 2 recently and enjoyed that probably more than the first book. And everything I've read about this series online and watched some booktube videos on it, everybody seems to be unanimous that the concluding book, The Light of All That Falls, is their favorite. It seems to be the most highly regarded book of the series. So I would like to get that one done before the end of the year so that I can finish off the Lacanius trilogy. Question 2, is there an autumnal book to transition to the end of the year? But the best that came to mind when I first thought of this question right off the bat was actually the book I'm reading right now, Watership Down by Richard Adams. So this is a kind of classic story from, is it the mid-60s, I want to say? No, the early 70s, from 72. So if you're not familiar with this, it is essentially about a band of rabbits, and it's told from their point of view, who are sort of driven out of their habitat. They're driven out of their home land, and have to kind of go on a journey and an adventure together to try to, make their way to a new living situation. At least, so far that's what's going on. As far as autumnal, I kind of thought of this cover, and the imagery of this made me think of autumn a little bit. So far in this book, I'm right about here, so I'm a little less than halfway through this, definitely enjoying it. But up to this point so far, there's been plenty of very vivid, very descriptive language used by the author to describe like the scenery and the landscape that the rabbits are living in and traveling through. I've certainly read many references to trees and leaves so far in reading this. So all of that kind of swirled around and it made me think that actually my current read, Watership Down, sort of qualified as an autumnal book. Unfortunately, I wanted to kind of verify that fact. I didn't want to just kind of throw that out there without checking it. So I flipped a little back through to the beginning part of the book to see if there was any reference to when the book is set as far as seasonally. And yeah, first thing I saw was it starts in the month of May. So much for the autumnal start to the book. However, in doing a little further research and trying to avoid spoilers in doing so, I am led to believe that this story takes place over the course of 6 months. So I think it qualifies because by the end of this book, I believe the rabbits will be sometime in October. So it does kind of line up with where we are right now seasonally. And I'm enjoying this book so far. I don't know what is going to become of these lovely little rabbits at the end of the book, but I do know that whatever that might be, it will be autumn at that time. So I think it qualifies. Maybe a little bit of a stretch, but yeah, as the seasons in this book transition to the fall, I'm definitely looking forward to Richard Adams' language and description of what that looks like as far as the scenery, because he's done a good job of explaining that so far. So, autumnal book, by the time I get to around here, will be Watership Down. Question 3, a new release that you are still waiting for. The best I can come up with for this question, and it's a little bit cliche at this point, and I'll just join the millions of other anxious and eager readers waiting for this, but I will go with The Winds of Winter by George R.R. Martin, which is the supposedly forthcoming 6th installment of A Song of Ice and Fire trilogy, which, for anybody who doesn't know, is the source material for the TV show A Game of Thrones. I am getting through this series right now, and generally what I do at the moment as far as reading is I'll be reading 2 books at a time. That's about the most I can handle at once. So right now I'll be reading kind of one standalone book alongside one book in a longer series that's usually fantasy and or sci-fi. So the multiple series that I'm getting through at the moment are the Lacanius trilogy, which I just mentioned, as well as A Song of Ice and Fire. So yeah, I have it right here. This is a Clash of Kings. This is book 2 in the series, and I'm reading this along with Watership Down right now, and I have quite a way to go still to get through this one. But yeah, I do plan on continuing with the series. Obviously, I want to finish it, and I'm hoping I'll be given that opportunity because infamously, The Winds of Winter has been much discussed and much waited for from George Martin for many years now, and he's sort of trickled out little promises and little hints about the status of it and that it might be released, but yeah, we're all just left waiting at this point. So yeah, don't expect it by the end of this year or the end of next year or any year soon, but the only book I could think of that I am waiting for would be The Winds of Winter. So number 4 is 3 books you want to read by the end of the year. On this point, I really don't have specific books that I am planning to read or that I specifically want to read by the end of 2024. Right alongside my methodology for kind of picking books and obtaining books to go on my TBR. The same holds true for picking books to read from my TBR, which is I do it randomly. I very rarely, if ever, pick a book off the TBR just because I feel like reading that one next. I feel that they're, once they enter into my collection and they go on the TBR, they all kind of stand equal to each other as far as I'm just going to use the randomness that I always do and see what comes up next. So that being said, I don't know what will come after Watership Down as far as my next standalone read. But, sometimes when I run the random number generator to pick my next read, I'll get a little hopeful, that it might pick one thing over the other. I'm eager to read anything that I grab to add to the collection. But I do have 3 sitting here that if I were to be so fortunate as to have these be picked by the random number generator, I'd be okay with that. I'd be just fine with that. So what they are, the first book is one that I got from a library sale recently. This is The First 15 Lives of Harry August. It's by Claire North, and it's a kind of sci-fi type book where my understanding is the main character almost in like a Groundhog Day type of situation where he relives his life over and over again. But I think he remembers each version of his life that he's lived. So yeah, it just sounds very intriguing. I picked it randomly, but why this one has a little extra interest for me at the moment is right when I added it to the collection, I immediately started seeing some other discussion of this pop up on other booktube channels, and I did actually exchange some comments and some correspondence with other booktubers about this book. So yeah, we'll see if the random number picks it from the TBR, but since I have kind of been seeing it talked about lately, it's a little bit more on my mind. The next book that I'd be very much okay if the random number generator finally picked off the TBR is this one. This is The Law of Dreams by Peter Behrens. This is another one of those that I used randomness to pick from a bookstore. And the reason I'm highlighting this one is that as this tends to go with the random number generator picking off the TBR, some things just don't get lucky and they kind of dance around getting picked for quite a long time. And this one definitely is an example of that. I got this one quite a long time ago at this point. Not as long ago as some of the other books on my TBR that have sat for years and I finally read this year, but I got it pretty early this year, and in reading through my TBR this year, it just has avoided getting picked to this point. So it's the oldest book I have up there. It's kind of in a class of its own as far as the time when I acquired it. So I just feel bad for it. It's kind of sitting there, and the random number generator will pick it eventually, but I feel like it's kind of due. And this is about someone, it's set in 1847. It's about somebody who leaves Ireland around the time of the Great Potato Famine and makes his way to America. So yeah, it seemed interesting, and I can only hope that eventually it gets lucky enough to get picked. And then the third one that I would be very much okay with the random number generator picking off my TBR is The Grapes of Wrath by Steinbeck. So I have this version I got, just kind of the naked hardcover here that I got from a used bookstore. Got it kind of around the middle of this year, I think, and it hasn't gotten picked yet as my next read, but I've heard so much about it, and really hopeful I'll really love this. So if after I finish my current book, if this gets selected next, I'll probably be a little extra excited about that versus some of the other books, but I give them all a fair, equal chance. But yeah, I'm looking forward to reading, is that the right way? Yeah, The Grapes of Wrath, hopefully sometime soon. So you have those three for books I'd be okay with getting picked for me to read by the end of the year. Question 5 is, what's a book that could shock you and become your favorite of the year? Again, kind of in line with not having real specific plans of what I'm going to read the next couple months. Anything that gets picked conceivably could do that. I guess to approach this question without really knowing what I'm going to be reading, I thought I would just mention what I currently believe I have in my slot at the top of my favorite books list for this year, and that would be Vladimir Nabokov's Pale Fire. So I read this kind of in the springtime this year, and it's my first Nabokov read. And I mean, if anybody has read Pale Fire, you'll know it's just one of the more unique and singular type reading experiences that I'm aware of. So basically, I probably will do a more detailed video about Pale Fire at some point, maybe once I've had even a second chance to read it, because it's just that much of a literary puzzle to try to get through. But basically, it's about a fictional poet, John Shade, who writes a poem called Pale Fire, and the poem itself is the middle portion of the book. And the poem is preceded by an introduction written by the poet, John Shade's neighbor, who's a professor named Charles Kinbote. And Kinbote is sort of obsessive about this poet, John Shade. He's obsessive about his work. There's a lot more that goes into the character of Kinbote, which, could take an hour-long video to dissect. But basically, he has an alter ego of himself as being a fictional king from a fictional land. I won't get too much more into this than that, but so the poem in the book is preceded by the narrator's, Charles Kinbote's, introduction to the poem, and then it is after the poem, the bulk of the book, actually about 85% of the text, is this narrator Kinbote's interpretation and criticism of the poem. So it's a wild sort of structure to the book. It's nothing like I've ever read before, but yeah, as far as my intro to reading Nabokov, I was just blown away by this one. So I think it's currently in the #1 spot for me. It's so singular and unique. I would struggle to think that something could knock it off in the next 2 months. From the pile that I just have sitting here next to me, I would say, Grapes of Wrath, if any of them, might be a candidate to vault over it into the top spot, just because of everything I've heard about that as a classic. So we'll see. But I thought, since I don't know what I'm going to be reading necessarily over the next few months, I would just mention Pale Fire, which is my current favorite book of the year, and sort of just forecast that I can't see it getting knocked out very easily. But we'll see. I would like it to, I'd like something to jump in front of it for sure. And then finally, question 6 is reading plans for next year. So kind of similar with, random reading pathways. I'm just going to kind of see what comes, as far as the end of this year and into next year too. Going back to George Martin and going back to A Song of Ice and Fire. I can say for sure in 2025, I will be continuing with that series. So we'll see how much further I get in 2024. Like I said, I'm just a little bit into book 2 right now. I'm missing book 3 at the moment. I don't have a Storm of Swords in my collection yet, but I do have book 4, A Feast for Crows. So I have that one ready to go, and then I have the big hardcover of A Dance with Dragons, book 5. So yeah, once I finish A Clash of Kings, and I also finish the Lacanius trilogy this year, then in 2025 I certainly will be continuing with A Song of Ice and Fire, because I've really been enjoying it so far. Big fan of the TV show, so I want to get those done, and I want to finish them because maybe The Winds of Winter will eventually come out, but we can only hope for that. So that's it for the end of year book tag questions. I hope I was able to give some, somewhat coherent information with those when I don't exactly plan what I'm reading, but nevertheless, it did make me think about it, and that's sort of a version of planning, so that was helpful. The last thing to do with this video is to tag others, so I'll go ahead and drop some other channels in the description that I want to tag. As always, hopefully I'll get people that haven't had a chance to do this tag yet. Apologies if I don't. And for anybody else that stumbles across this and has any interest in doing the tag, I'd love to see it. So please go ahead and do it. But that's it. That's the end of your book tag. Thanks for following along. I appreciate my voice for sticking with me through this cold. And I look forward to checking back in with more updates soon. Thanks.